Imagine two neighbors in a typical American suburb. Both work mid-level management jobs, and both take home exactly $75,000 a year after taxes. 10 years later, the first neighbor is debt-free, with a portfolio that covers their mortgage. The second is struggling to find the cash for a car repair, pinned down by a balance on every credit card they own. Neither person received a windfall. Their base expenses for housing, food, and transport were identical. They worked the same hours in the same economic climate. The divergence came from a single, repetitive choice. One individual treated a portion of every paycheck as a non-negotiable reserve, while the other viewed their entire income as money available to spend. If the outcome of saving is so obviously superior, we have to ask why the actual act of doing it is so difficult for the average person. This diagram shows a phenomenon called present bias. It's a cognitive lean where our brains give massive weight to rewards we can have immediately, while the value of a future benefit seems to shrink the further away it is. This is a biological holdover. Acquiring a resource today triggers a hit of dopamine, a physical reward that helped our ancestors survive in environments of scarcity. A retirement goal 30 years away provides no such chemical feedback. To the primitive parts of the brain, a dollar saved is simply a dollar that provides no pleasure today. This is why relying on willpower alone rarely works. You are essentially asking your conscious mind to win a daily fight against your own brain chemistry. In the 1920s, American society reached a tipping point where this bias became the national norm. The economy was expanding, and for the first time, mass advertising began to normalize the idea of buying now and paying later. Stores were filled with a new wave of electric appliances and automobiles. Because credit was easy to obtain, families who had previously saved for years began to spend their future earnings in advance. The prevailing logic was that the growth would continue indefinitely. There was a sense that having a cash cushion was unnecessary when next year's salary was certain to be higher. This collective shift toward consumption left millions of households with no liquid reserves, meaning they had zero defense against an economic downturn. When the stock market fractured in 1929, that lack of defense became a catastrophe. The speculative wealth that fueled the decade's spending disappeared in days. The crisis moved from Wall Street to the local bank. When these institutions failed, they took the remaining life savings of the middle class with them, leaving families with nothing to fall back on. Without savings, people were forced into a desperate scramble for any form of income. Even those with decades of professional experience found themselves on the street, competing for a single day of manual labor. This was the reality for families caught without a buffer. They lost their homes and were forced into a nomadic existence, living out of trailers and tents. Surviving this period turned saving into a core survival trait. For this generation, a bank balance wasn't for luxury. It was the only thing that stood between their family and total destitution. This ingrained a habit of liquidity that many passed down to their children as a primary financial rule. This historical focus on protection eventually evolved. Over time, the defensive saving for a rainy day matured into a more strategic view of how money actually functions. Most people still view a dollar through the lens of consumption. To them, a dollar is a voucher that is meant to be exchanged for a physical object or a service. This diagram illustrates the alternative, the investor view. Here, money is assigned a specific mission. One path covers the cost of living, one builds the emergency shield learned from the 1930s, and the final path is directed toward growth. This third path treats money as a worker. Instead of being spent, these dollars are deployed to generate more capital through interest and dividends, effectively laboring on behalf of the owner. Mentally relabeling a dollar from a consumable to a tool creates a different internal incentive. It provides a way to counter the pull of present bias by giving the act of saving its own sense of progress and utility. But even with this mindset, the biological urge to spend today remains. The question is, how do the most successful savers actually defeat it? They don't try to outmuscle their impulses with discipline. Instead, they acknowledge that their willpower is finite and unreliable. They use a system like the one shown here. A paycheck enters the pipeline and is automatically diverted into specific accounts before the owner even sees the balance. The decision is made once, then executed by the system every month. This involves setting up automatic transfers to brokerage accounts and high-yield savings. It means the saving happens before the spending can even begin. By removing the need to make a choice every month, these individuals bypass the emotional friction of money management. Wealth becomes the result of a process that functions independently of how the person feels on any given day. Accumulating these worker dollars is the essential foundation, but it is only the first stage of the process. The true engine of wealth is compound growth, the way these small, automated reserves begin to multiply and build on themselves over long periods of time. In Part 2, we will look at how to deploy these savings into the market to turn a modest reserve into long-term financial independence.
High salaries often mask a lack of true financial security. A large paycheck creates an appearance of wealth, but income alone rarely builds a lasting safety net. To understand the modern drive to save, we have to look back a century. Throughout the 1920s, the American economy moved with immense speed. Consumerism expanded as credit became widely available, and for many, economic momentum felt permanent. Then, in October 1929, that momentum fractured. The stock market collapsed in days, erasing years of progress in a single week. Those panicked crowds standing outside failing banks carried a trauma that would shape an entire generation. They learned that a thriving economy could disappear overnight, creating a defensive culture of hoarding cash simply to survive. History delivered a harsh lesson on the psychological need to save. Yet relying entirely on a static pile of cash, whether under a mattress or in a standard bank account, solves only part of the equation. Today, a different kind of threat attacks those cash reserves. While modern savers might not face a sudden nationwide depression, they face a constant erosion from everyday volatility. Unpredictability is a guaranteed feature. A transmission fails on the highway. A doctor's visit results in a massive unexpected invoice. Before any long-term planning can begin, these daily hazards require a dedicated defense mechanism, the emergency fund. This specific reserve serves a single vital purpose. When a crisis hits, it gives a family the exact amount of liquidity needed to absorb the blow, preventing them from falling into a spiral of high-interest credit card debt. An emergency fund will not make you rich, and it isn't supposed to. It is a behavioral shield, built exclusively to protect your peace of mind while your other assets go to work. Once that defensive shield is in place, the strategy must shift. Money left sitting idle eventually loses its purchasing power to inflation. It has to move from the sidelines into active play. The mechanism driving that forward motion is compound growth. This diagram illustrates how the math plays out. An initial sum of money earns interest. Then, in the next cycle, both the original money and that new interest work together to generate an even larger return. Over a few months, the progress looks flat, but left alone over decades, those repeated cycles begin to multiply rapidly, turning a slow crawl into a steep exponential climb. In this state, capital functions as an active participant in its own expansion. It creates a self-sustaining cycle where growth no longer depends on your manual labor. Because this engine relies on repeated cycles, the most valuable ingredient in wealth building is not the amount of money you start with. It is time. This chart tracks a lifetime of investing from age 25 to 65. Consider a saver who begins investing a modest, consistent amount at age 25. By the time they reach 65, decades of compounding cycles have turned those small contributions into a massive peak of wealth. Now look at a second saver who waits until age 40 to begin. To match that exact same final peak by age 65, their required monthly contribution has to be drastically higher. By starting later, the second saver misses out on 15 years of compounding cycles. They are forced to aggressively out-earn the math they left on the table. Time acts as an unforgiving mathematical multiplier. An early start with small amounts is financially more powerful than a massive salary achieved much later in life. But there is a vulnerability in this math. Compound growth demands uninterrupted consistency, and human behavior is rarely consistent. Attempting to manually transfer money into savings every month is a losing battle. Eventually, decision fatigue sets in, or a temptation arises, and the cycle breaks. To bridge the gap between human unpredictability and mathematical certainty, savers need automated habits. The most effective method is routing funds directly from a paycheck into investments.
bypassing the checking account. The money moves before it can be spent. Lasting wealth rarely comes from sudden windfalls or lucky stock picks. It is the result of invisible, automated choices, relentlessly executing in the background over decades. The primary function of this financial architecture is to buy optionality. By removing the monthly struggle of willpower through automation, the friction of setting money aside vanishes. It shifts the dynamic from a present-day loss to a calculated transfer of freedom to your future self. It is completely normal to look at a modest current income and feel like building this engine is out of reach. But the math does not require massive starting capital, and the strategy does not require perfection. It only requires the decision to begin. Financial freedom is built one automated dollar at a time. To keep learning how to build a stronger financial future, subscribe to Parchaki Money Lab.
Are you ready to start saving?
Start saving. Start growing. Start building your future with Parchaki Money Lab. Subscribe now.